This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Today on CityCast Philly. If you've been reading news articles online, you know it's election season. The Pennsylvania primary is next week. But how do you know if the news you're consuming is accurate and reliable? I'm speaking with a local journalism professor about the ways we can spot the difference between real news and fake, and a kind of disinformation called pink slime. It's Wednesday, April 17th. I'm Trenae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Andrea Wenzel, author and associate professor at Temple University's Klein College of Media and Communication. Welcome to CityCast Philly.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yes. Now, for full disclosure, I am a graduate of the School of Media and Communication at Temple. So, woo to you.
Yay.
But Andrea, our conversation today is really going to be centered around media literacy and how we as consumers of news can make sure we're getting reliable information. I want to ask you first, can you think of any local examples of fake news or misinformation that we might all have seen?
One of the issues is just that there's just so much information, and we're often seeing it in so many different spaces that you're not always necessarily paying a lot of attention of where it's coming from. And so the problem is, if given how much is coming at us and how we're often so busy, if you only are getting it through the headlines you're noticing or chatter and conversation that you're noticing, there's a chance that it might be coming from somewhere that is not what most people would consider to be sort of credible local news and information.
Right.
In terms of like specific names of publications, I don't have like a comprehensive list of like, watch out for this one or that one. But there's, a number of sites that people now often refer to as pink slime sites, where the main purpose of them is not necessarily to provide you with local news as much as it is to kind of circulate political campaigning kind of information. So that's one thing to be mindful of.
Andrea, what is pink slime journalism?
Pink slime journalism is generally used to refer to sites that are looking like local news, set up to look like a hyper-local outlet, but are actually being run in a non-transparent way by partisan actors. And most of the content is automated, coming from AI, but there's often some partisan stories that get circulated as well as that sort of automated content.
And how do you know you're looking at a pink slime site?
I think one of the biggest ways to tell that you're looking at a pink slime site is, the simple act of just going and looking at the about pages, and there might not be an about page. And so you might want to then Google the name of the site, and some of the big pink slime networks like Metric Media Network. If you can't figure out who the people are who are writing it, if there's no bylines and there's no about page, no information about who owns it, who funds it, then that's something that might trigger a red flag.
Okay, so pink slime, like what? Where did that term come from?
The term pink slime was originally used to refer to the kind of scraps of meat, the kind of extra parts of the meat that get chopped up and put into like hamburgers as like filler to kind of make up the hamburger. And so
that's gross.
It's pretty gross. And so that sort of filler idea was used to describe the meat version of pink slime. And a journalist who was critiquing the way that some of these early pink slime outlets were doing journalism and kind of using sort of filler automated content used the pink slime term to refer to that journalism.
Now, you mentioned that some of these pink slime websites are local sites. The Philadelphia Inquirer recently wrote an article pointing out some of them. I wonder if you could kind of give us some examples of like sites that are circulating that might be like an example of it.
Sure. So there's a number of sites that are part of something called the Metric Media Network. The Tau Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia University has done a lot of research on the Metric Media Network. They have many sites around the U.S. In Pennsylvania, there's quite a few. So Philadelphia Inquirer gave the example of the West Montgomery Times and how they had offered quite a lot of coverage of a state senator, and it was sort of just all very positive stories, and sometimes the same story, often with the same photo. And the thing with many of these sites that if you are looking at them is that they look kind of strange. And they're often like not, there's not necessarily like regularly updated news in the way that we would expect it. Some of the stories are kind of the same or visually the same or use even some of the same language. And so it's more about how these are sort of places to circulate things elsewhere. So they might not be getting a lot of people going and checking their site, but people might be, posting, someone might pick it up.
And share it on like social media.
Yeah.
Got you. I mean, I'm going to play kind of devil's advocate here a little bit, but I mean, what's wrong with having a site that does that?
I don't know that there's anything wrong with having partisan journalism. I think that that's a different thing. I think the difference between pink slime journalism and partisan journalism is the issue of transparency. So, and even amongst partisan journalism, there's some that is transparent and some that is not. But I think that there's not necessarily anything inherently wrong with having partisan journalism that is transparent about what it is and where it's coming from. But there's a difference between that and, as these pink slime outlets, they put out statements saying we are offering objective local news or whatever it might say, they are not being transparent about who they are or why they're doing what they're doing. So that's a key difference to me. Often it's difficult to even find out who's publishing these stories. So that's the difference between, explaining who you are and where you're coming from and doing this in a way that's like completely opaque.
Interesting stuff. More on this issue after the break. This is CityCast Philly. Andrea, I want to talk a little bit more about pink slime journalism sites. Do we know who's funding these sites?
Yes and no. So there's the Tau Center for Digital Journalism has a pretty extensive report that goes through some of the different networks and who funds some of those. There's like particular right-leaning people with lots and lots of money who have been instrumental in setting up these networks. And there's not a lot of transparency about how the funding has worked. And they've done a lot of investigative work to try to uncover, like, what are the relationships between these different actors. It's something that is better to kind of refer you to their report than try to detail the particulars of the different individuals myself, because it gets pretty complicated. It's largely dark money. And so it's deliberately not very simple to figure out.
Are the slime sites reaching their target audience?
I don't think we really know, because it's not obvious that they're having a big impact. The few studies that have been done have been kind of inconclusive in that regard, I think. The challenge there is a lot of the influence is more indirect. So it's not like a bunch of people are going to their websites, because their websites really aren't made for a bunch of people to go to, because they would quickly get really bored because there's, a bunch of stories about gas prices or, other sorts of like kind of filler content that's sort of automated. They're not really designed to be a place where you get to know about your community and build a relationship with it. They're more designed as here's a space that we're going to put the stuff, and then it's going to get picked up and circulated within like the conservative news ecosystem. There's been examples and case studies, and the Tau Center report documents different case studies in different places where a story would go out on a pink slime site, get picked up by, someone to lead to someone else, to lead to Fox News or, whatever it might be. And then it's, suddenly like a small issue in a school system becomes like the center of a culture war conversation, and often in a really distorted way. And so it's sort of been used to, stoke culture war battles, to put spotlights on particular candidates at key moments in local elections. The other kind of impact question is sort of, some of my colleagues often point back to the Steve Bannon quote, where you just kind of flood the zone with misinformation or insert your own expletive. And I think the idea of just sort of using these sorts of sites as a way of undermining the trustworthiness of local news and information is part of the goal of these efforts.
And Steve Bannon was a former White House chief strategist, and he ran the Breitbart News website.
Yes.
So I see that maybe Pink Slime sites are filling what might be an empty space in the media landscape. And there was a time back a few years ago when CityCast Philly popped up into, the local news space, and our Hey Philly newsletter popped up. And maybe people thought, well, this is a new player. Are they real? But hopefully you saw my beautiful face and the rest of the team, and you knew that, okay, well, maybe we can trust this podcast and newsletter. In all seriousness, though, what do you think this says about the state of local journalism?
I mean, I think that your example about CityCast is an example of you can establish trust with people because you are journalists who've been working in the local news space for a while before this initiative. I mean, you have a track record, you have a sense of connection to the people that you are trying to connect with in your work. So I think there's a lot of great things happening in local journalism in Philly and elsewhere, like what you're doing. And I think that, I don't think Pink Slime is, I think it's concerning. I don't think it's, an existential threat to local journalism. I think we have other things that are existential threats to local journalism. It doesn't help, right? It's not doing anybody any favors. And it's particularly something to be mindful of and concerned about during elections, and because that's sort of when it ramps up and gets really more active. But I mean, there's challenges with mis and disinformation during election times that affect our sort of local information space, even beyond Pink Slime. I mean, there's, the concerns about disinformation coming on WhatsApp channels, or, there's all different ways that kind of unhelpful players in this work are trying to, put out false information and influence people and reach them where they're at. There's all different ways that people who are trying to have a negative influence on elections are doing that. There's lots of other conversations we can have about the state of local news, but it's definitely not helping. But it's I think just one issue within that larger questions around local news.
Andrea, earlier this week, we had an episode about the Pennsylvania primary happening next week, and voters may be reading up on candidates and seeing ads on social media before they head to the polls. Are there other types of fake news or misinformation voters should be aware of?
I'm not a political strategist, but I imagine people who are using every tool they can find to reach people and not necessarily share fake news, but influence people in ways that is beneficial to them. And so I think that the more you can be kind of proactive about getting your information, I feel like the better your chances are in terms of, if you rather than wait for it to come to you and to find you, if you can go out and check either a news site that you find reputable, or look up, there's a number of voting guides that you can find, connected to whoever, whatever the organization or outlet that you might trust or identify with. Your chances of kind of getting a bit more thorough information is going to come from you kind of being more proactive with that, which I know is hard because everyone's very busy. But
right.
Yeah.
You may not have a couple hours just to kind of go on a deep dive on a topic or for a candidate.
Yeah, which is why, and I too, like often will end up relying on like a voter guide. And sometimes you're, asking your friends for what voter guide are you using, or things like that. And that's just the reality of, I think, how a lot of us operate in this space.
That's Andrea Wenzel, author and associate professor at Temple University's Klein College of Media and Communications. Thank you so much for joining me on CityCast Philly.
Thank you so much.
And Andrea also has a new book, Anti-Racist Journalism, The Challenge of Creating Equitable Local News. We'll have a link in our show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed this episode about media literacy, tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.